Let's begin. But first, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Broken Truth. The grand ballroom glittered under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, every corner alive with laughter, clinking glasses, and the hum of carefully curated music. Isabella walked slowly through the crowd, her hand resting protectively on the swell of her pregnant belly, hoping this evening would be a celebration of life, love, and the milestones she had worked so hard to cherish. Her dress, a soft champagne silk that hugged her figure delicately, was chosen with care, a subtle statement of elegance and maternal pride. Guests greeted her politely, some offering congratulations, others whispering compliments about how radiant she looked, unaware that beneath her composed exterior, her heart was already tense with anticipation. She searched the room for Richard, expecting to find his familiar smile, the warmth in his eyes that had once made every challenge seem lighter. But he was nowhere near her. Then, as if the universe itself had conspired to humiliate her, Richard appeared across the room, and beside him was Eliza, radiant, seductive, and utterly inappropriate for the occasion. Cameras flashed, capturing their every movement, every laugh, and every intimate gesture that Isabella had not earned but was forced to witness. Richard's arm draped possessively around Eliza's waist as if the world itself had no other purpose than to admire their union. Guests began to murmur, some politely, others not so subtly, their whispers slicing through Isabella's composure. "Is that with her again?" How could he? Her ears caught only fragments, yet they landed with full force, shattering the fragile shield she had built around herself. Isabella's pulse quickened, a mixture of disbelief, pain, and humiliation flooding her. Her stomach tightened reflexively, the sharp pangs of anxiety mingling with the physical weight of pregnancy. She had imagined this night as a shared moment of joy, a celebration marking the next chapter of their life together. Instead, it was a public spectacle of betrayal, a vivid display of Richard's arrogance and disregard for the vows they had shared. Photographers captured every glance, every whisper of laughter between Richard and Eliza, preserving evidence of his audacity and her marginalization. She tried to lift her chin, to maintain the poise she had always been praised for, but the effort was almost too much. The humiliation was unbearable, an invisible hand pressing on her chest, making each breath shallow, each heartbeat echo in her ears. Her trust, carefully built over years, now felt like shards beneath her feet, splintering with every passing second. Every smile from the guests felt like mockery, every congratulatory remark from strangers a hollow echo in the face of her personal devastation. Isabella had hoped to feel celebrated, supported, and loved tonight, but all she found was exposure, ridicule, and abandonment in the very room where she had expected warmth and care. The stark contrast between her vulnerability and Richard's bold disregard carved itself into her memory, an emotional wound that would fester long after the night ended, setting the stage for a story of betrayal, heartbreak, and the fight to reclaim what had been stolen from her. In the early days of their marriage, Isabella often marveled at the life she had stepped into. Richard was everything the world had made him out to be: handsome, ambitious, and intoxicatingly charming. He had swept her off her feet with grand gestures, candlelit dinners atop skyscrapers, and vacations that seemed to exist outside of time and reality. Society admired them as a perfect couple: Isabella, the graceful and intelligent bride; Richard, the powerful and commanding husband. Friends envied her life, yet none could see the depth of devotion she felt for him, nor the quiet promises he whispered in private, promising a future filled with love, security, and mutual respect. During those early years, Richard seemed attentive and present. He would leave the boardroom behind to meet her at unexpected moments, bringing flowers or small tokens that reminded her she was cherished. They spent nights walking along private terraces, talking about hopes, dreams, and the family they planned to build together. Isabella felt secure in the knowledge that their love was not just a public spectacle but a private bond, a foundation she could rely upon in moments of doubt. She reveled in the attention, not because she craved wealth, but because it represented his desire to invest in their relationship. Then came the pregnancy, and with it, the first cracks in the illusion. At first, Richard's reaction seemed positive. He smiled when she told him, kissed her softly, and promised to be by her side. But soon, the warmth began to fade. He congratulated her politely, but there was an unmistakable edge of detachment. Calls became shorter, evenings longer, and the once spontaneous gestures disappeared entirely. Business trips multiplied, sometimes with just a brief text, "Busy, can't make it tonight." Isabella told herself it was temporary, that work pressures explained the shift. She clung to hope, believing that patience and understanding were virtues that would bring them back to the love they had once shared. Rumors began to surface quietly, whispered at exclusive events and circulating among mutual acquaintances. A woman seen at corporate dinners, a familiar name appearing in social media photos, fleeting glimpses of flirtation caught by sharp eyes. Isabella caught fragments, that she forced herself to ignore, convincing herself that these were exaggerations, that her husband's loyalty remained intact. She clung to the idea that love could withstand distance, and that her silence, her patience, and her loyalty were the measures of a marriage that could endure. Yet, the isolation began to take a toll. Nights alone in their sprawling home grew longer and colder. The absence of conversation, affection, and attention left empty spaces that no amount of luxury could fill. Expensive gifts arrived where meaningful words or emotional presence should have been, flowers replaced apologies, and silence became a constant companion. Isabella felt her spirit quietly eroding, a slow attrition of hope and trust that no one could see. Each day, she bore the weight of invisibility, the pain of longing for a husband who existed in the same house but had grown distant in heart and mind. The wealth that surrounded her, the grandeur of their lifestyle, masked the neglect in ways outsiders could not perceive. Everyone saw the perfectly dressed woman, elegant and serene, standing beside a man who appeared attentive, successful, and devoted. Few realized that behind the image, Isabella navigated her days in a quiet struggle, balancing the demands of pregnancy with the gnawing ache of abandonment. The illusion of love persisted publicly, even as private reality fractured. What others admired as devotion was, in truth, a fragile facade, one that Isabella clung to desperately, hoping that her patience would eventually coax Richard back to the husband she once knew, even as the distance between them widened with every passing day. While Isabella's days were filled with quiet struggle, Richard basked in a world of indulgence that seemed entirely detached from the consequences of his actions. On a sun-drenched terrace overlooking turquoise waters, he laughed freely with Eliza, the woman whose presence had quietly replaced his attention to his wife. Champagne glasses clinked, reflecting the golden glow of the afternoon sun, while the soft sound of waves provided a soundtrack of leisure and ease. Every smile, every intimate gesture, every shared glance was captured by discreet cameras, moments carefully curated and shared on social media to project an image of carefree sophistication. To Richard, the world was a playground, and Eliza the prize that validated his freedom from responsibility. Eliza, radiant and self-assured, seemed to thrive in the spotlight, her presence commanding attention as though the world itself revolved around her charm and allure. She posted photos of exotic meals, sunset strolls, and private yacht rides, each image a subtle flaunting of wealth, beauty, and indulgence. Captions hinted at a life unburdened by expectation. "Why worry about unnecessary responsibilities when life can be this beautiful?" she wrote, a statement that dripped with mockery toward the obligations Richard had abandoned at home. Her tone was playful yet cutting, and the message was clear: the demands Isabella faced, the physical strain of pregnancy, the emotional weight of loneliness, were irrelevant to the couple she now occupied. Richard scrolled through the notifications on his phone with a casual detachment, his own social media engagement reflecting amusement and approval rather than concern. Calls from the hospital went unanswered, messages ignored, yet in this sunlit paradise, he remained comfortably removed from accountability. Each post, each shared image, was a testament to his choices, a deliberate contrast to the woman fighting silently for her dignity and for the life of their unborn child. He laughed at Eliza's jokes about freedom and leisure, oblivious to the storm brewing at home, to the whispers of disappointment and outrage that would soon follow him. As the world's attention shifted to their posts, public reaction was immediate and harsh. Followers expressed outrage, commenting on the audacity of living so luxuriously while a pregnant wife faced hardship and potential danger. The juxtaposition was stark: a woman alone in pain, and a man flaunting wealth and pleasure, a mistress laughing at responsibilities that should have been shared. Eliza, initially confident and untouchable, began to notice the tide of criticism. The same social media that had elevated her now cast shadows of judgment over every smiling photograph, revealing the fragility of a facade built entirely on indulgence and disregard. While Isabella struggled quietly, enduring nights of pain and anxiety, Richard and Eliza existed in a separate reality, one of sunlit luxury and carefully curated images. Their world was built on appearances, a vivid contrast to the stark reality of abandonment at home. Every clink of champagne, every shared laugh, every glamorous post became a reminder of betrayal, a growing outrage that the world could see unfolding. The spotlight that Eliza once relished now illuminated the moral gulf between indulgence and responsibility, between selfish pleasure and the consequences of choosing desire over devotion. In that glow, the contrast could not have been clearer. Isabella suffered in silence, while Richard flaunted a life he had chosen over the family he had vowed to protect. Isabella's home, once filled with laughter and the faint hum of music from Richard's late-night parties, now felt unbearably silent. The vast rooms echoed with emptiness, each corner a reminder of absence, each shadow a reflection of neglect. Her body ached, the pregnancy taking an unexpected toll as complications began to surface. She awoke one morning to sharp pains that radiated across her abdomen, dizziness clouding her vision, and a sense of foreboding that made her heart pound in her chest. The luxuries surrounding her, expensive furnishings, sprawling space, and a home staff trained to anticipate her every need, felt meaningless in the face of urgent human vulnerability. No amount of wealth could fill the void left by the one person she needed most, Richard. Doctors had warned her about potential risks with her condition, but without her husband present to advocate, consent to procedures, or simply offer comfort, the burden of decision and the weight of fear fell entirely on Isabella's shoulders. Each doctor's visit became a tense negotiation between urgency and patience, each ultrasound a reminder of how precious and fragile the life inside her was. Nurses moved quickly to monitor her health, their voices soft and reassuring, yet the worry in their eyes betrayed the severity of her condition. Isabella lay on examination tables, hands trembling, as she tried to mask her pain behind polite smiles and quiet nods, but the exhaustion was impossible to hide. Every procedure, every test, every consultation felt heavier because it was faced alone. Friends and family arrived in attempts to help, their presence a balm but only partially filling the void. They brought meals, offered errands, and tried to create moments of comfort, yet every conversation inevitably returned to the same painful question: where was Richard? Their words, though supportive, could not replace the reassurance of a husband who had promised partnership and care. Isabella found herself navigating appointments, medication schedules, and sudden hospital visits while the man whose name once carried her sense of safety remained absent, unreachable, and indifferent. The injustice of this neglect gnawed at her, sharpening the ache in her heart and intensifying the physical strain of her condition. Despite the fear and isolation, a quiet strength began to emerge in Isabella. She learned to advocate for herself, asking questions of doctors, ensuring that her baby's needs were prioritized, and making decisions with clarity even while her body trembled. Each successful consultation, each careful step toward maintaining her health, reinforced a growing confidence she could endure without him. Nurses and doctors noted her resilience, often exchanging looks of admiration for the woman who faced each challenge with a composed determination. She adapted to the rhythms of her body and the medical advice surrounding her, drawing on a well of inner strength that seemed almost inexhaustible. Nights were the hardest, when the house fell completely silent and the pain of absence pressed against her chest. She whispered to her unborn child, promises of love, protection, and courage, the words a lifeline in the lonely hours. She imagined a future where her child would thrive, where she would reclaim the dignity, security, and happiness that had been threatened by betrayal. Each day became a testament to endurance, to maternal instinct, and to the quiet heroism of a woman abandoned in the most critical time of her life. Isabella's suffering highlighted not just physical vulnerability but moral injustice, and in facing it with courage, she transformed helplessness into quiet power, proving that strength can flourish even in the most isolating circumstances. The first whispers started like sparks, subtle and almost imperceptible, but they quickly ignited into a firestorm. A friend of Isabella, frustrated and heartbroken by the injustice she had witnessed, leaked photos and details of Richard's affair to a major media outlet. Within hours, the story exploded across social media. Billionaire husband chooses mistress over pregnant wife trended worldwide, and news headlines highlighted his absence while Isabella struggled with complications. Public outrage mounted as followers and commentators expressed shock, anger, and disbelief. The man once admired for charm and wealth was now facing scrutiny for cruelty, indifference, and betrayal, and there was no way to silence the growing storm. Photographers soon located Richard and Eliza at a luxury resort, their sun-soaked smiles and champagne glasses contrasting painfully with the reality of Isabella's suffering. As cameras flashed, reporters approached, shouting questions over the roar of waves and the hum of music. "Where's your wife while she fights for her child?" one shouted. "Do you have no conscience?" another demanded. Richard remained unnervingly composed, his expression cool, eyes fixed somewhere distant, as if the accusations were mere background noise. His cold, dismissive replies, short, clipped, and devoid of empathy, sent shockwaves through the public. Videos of his reactions circulated online within minutes, comments piling up in condemnation. The man who had commanded respect and admiration for years now appeared callous and unfeeling to millions of viewers. Eliza, who had previously radiated confidence and charm, suddenly faltered. Her smiles became tight, her laughter forced, as she felt the tide of public opinion shifting against her. Social media, once filled with admiration for her beauty and lifestyle, erupted in criticism. Commenters called her names, accused her of complicity in a cruel betrayal, and dissected every public image for signs of guilt. Even influencers and celebrities joined the discussion, framing the affair as a moral failure that could not be ignored. Her aura of untouchable glamour began to crumble, revealing that public approval is fleeting, and that cruelty and complicity carry consequences, no matter how carefully they are hidden behind wealth or charm. Meanwhile, Isabella's suffering became a central point of empathy and outrage. Articles highlighted her vulnerability, the dangers of her pregnancy, and the emotional toll of betrayal, painting her as a resilient figure fighting against injustice. Public sympathy surged, with many praising her strength, composure, and courage in the face of abandonment. Richard's image, by contrast, fell rapidly, his indifference and selfishness amplified by the very technology and media that had once celebrated him. The moral reckoning was immediate and unavoidable. Privilege and money could not shield him from scrutiny, nor could they silence the public's moral judgment. Eliza's position, once enviable, now appeared precarious, and Richard's arrogance was laid bare for the world to see. The stark contrast between Isabella's suffering and their indulgence created a narrative that demanded attention, one where the betrayal of love and duty was no longer private, and where the consequences of choosing desire over responsibility were finally inescapable. The exposure marked a turning point, shifting the story from hidden cruelty to public accountability, and setting the stage for the emotional and social fallout that would follow. Isabella had reached a point where the weight of betrayal, humiliation, and exhaustion pressed down so heavily that it threatened to crush her completely. Nights of sleepless worry for her unborn child, days filled with physical strain and emotional neglect, and the constant echo of Richard's absence had built a pressure that no amount of composure could contain. She cried quietly in her room, her body trembling not just from pregnancy, but from the deep ache of heartbreak and injustice. Yet, in the midst of this despair, something within her began to shift, a realization that her strength, her dignity, and her future did not depend on the man who had so carelessly abandoned them. It started with small acts of defiance. Isabella began organizing her affairs, contacting lawyers and advisors, and ensuring that her financial and medical matters were handled independently. She refused to rely on Richard for decisions that he had repeatedly shirked, asserting control in areas where he had always assumed authority. Each step she took reinforced a growing sense of empowerment. She could survive without him, she could protect her child without his presence, and she could reclaim the life that he had so thoughtlessly disregarded. The breaking point that had threatened to undo her instead became a crucible, forging a new version of Isabella, resilient, determined, and unwilling to tolerate further betrayal. Through careful investigation, she discovered the full extent of Richard's infidelity. Emails, social media posts, and leaked photos painted a picture of a man whose priorities had shifted entirely to Eliza. His absences were not the result of unavoidable work commitments, as he had claimed. They were deliberate choices, each one a testament to his disregard for her and the life growing inside her. Isabella absorbed the truth not with despair, but with clarity. The deception, the secrecy, the lies, all were revealed, and with that revelation came the liberation of understanding. She knew now that her loyalty had been one-sided, and that the love she had poured into their marriage had been squandered. This knowledge, rather than breaking her, became a source of strength. Richard's world outside Isabella's growing autonomy began to crumble simultaneously. Investors who had once admired his acumen and business savvy started to hesitate. Whispers of scandal, moral failure, and neglect circulated through elite social circles. Partners questioned whether they wanted to be associated with a man whose personal failings now threatened to overshadow his professional reputation. Board meetings became tense, deals stalled, and advisors expressed concern over how his absence and public disgrace might impact the empire he had built. For the first time, Richard faced tangible consequences that money could not smooth over: social judgment, professional doubt, and a public image rapidly deteriorating in real time. Meanwhile, Isabella's independence grew more apparent. Friends and family marveled at her composure, noting how gracefully she navigated the challenges of pregnancy while reclaiming control over her life. Her moral strength shone through the adversity, contrasting starkly with Richard's increasing isolation and defenselessness in the court of public opinion. Social media buzzed with praise for her resilience, framing her as a symbol of dignity, endurance, and empowerment in the face of betrayal. She was no longer merely the wife of a billionaire, she was a woman whose character and strength demanded respect. In the quiet moments, Isabella reflected on the transformation she had undergone. She no longer sought validation from Richard, no longer hoped for apologies or recognition. The breaking point had passed, leaving behind clarity, self-respect, and a renewed sense of purpose. She understood that her life, her child, and her happiness were hers to protect and nurture. Meanwhile, Richard, surrounded by wealth and opulence, confronted the stark reality of isolation. For every decision he had made to indulge desire over duty, a corresponding loss had emerged. The emotional and moral turning point was undeniable. One life rose with dignity, resilience, and clarity, while the other, despite power and influence, faced growing emptiness, social condemnation, and a crumbling world of facades that money alone could not repair. The first cries of her baby echoed through the quiet hospital room, sharp and insistent, shaking Isabella awake from a haze of fear, exhaustion, and anticipation. Labor had been grueling, each contraction a test of endurance that pushed her body and spirit to the limits. Yet, when she finally held her newborn in her arms, the tiny, fragile life seemed to fill every corner of the room with hope, love, and an unshakable sense of triumph. Tears streamed down her face, a mix of relief and awe, as she realized that despite the betrayals and abandonment, she had brought life into the world and protected it with her own courage. The baby's heartbeat beneath her hands was steady, a rhythm that anchored her, reminding her of the power she carried not just physically, but emotionally. Richard arrived hours later, flanked by the flash of cameras and the persistent questions of reporters eager to capture his reaction. He stepped into the room with the air of entitlement he had long cultivated, expecting gratitude, tears of relief, or at least a word of reconciliation. But Isabella's gaze, steady and resolute, met him without any trace of the warmth he hoped to see. She did not rise, she did not reach for him, and she refused to acknowledge his presence. The husband who had ignored her pleas, abandoned her in the most vulnerable moments of her life, now stood powerless. The grandiosity of his wealth, the influence of his status, and the carefully curated image of perfection crumbled under the undeniable reality: his actions had consequences that no fortune could erase. Eliza, the mistress whose presence had once seemed invincible, was gone. Rumors suggested that the public backlash and moral condemnation had forced her into retreat, her social media accounts deactivated and her appearances carefully limited. The contrast between her absence and Richard's helplessness underscored the lesson he had ignored for too long: indulgence built on betrayal could not withstand scrutiny or morality. While he remained surrounded by cameras, the flashes captured not triumph but isolation, the stark emptiness of a man whose choices had left him exposed to judgment from every angle. The world had witnessed his failures, and the image was indelible. Inside the room, Isabella focused entirely on her child, cradling the newborn close to her chest, feeling the warmth and life she had fought so hard to preserve. Every instinct, every ounce of energy, and every beat of her heart was devoted to protection, nurturing, and building a future untainted by Richard's selfishness. She no longer sought his approval, his recognition, or his presence. The betrayal that had once threatened to destroy her had instead forged resilience, a deep and unshakable strength born from survival, love, and the realization that she was capable of creating a world for herself and her child entirely independent of his influence. The cameras continued to flash, the reporters continued to shout, but Isabella remained a figure of calm, grace, and power. The emotional peak of her journey was evident. She had reclaimed her life, her dignity, and her authority over her future. Richard, though wealthy and influential, faced the irreversible consequences of his choices, while Isabella emerged not only as a survivor but as a symbol of maternal strength, endurance, and empowerment. The night of betrayal had ended, but her triumph was just beginning, a life reclaimed, a child protected, and a spirit unbroken. Months had passed since the hospital room had witnessed the most pivotal moment of Isabella's life. The baby, once fragile and uncertain, now thrived under her vigilant care, a symbol of resilience and hope. Isabella had left behind the luxury and pretense of a marriage built on appearances, retreating instead to a life defined by authenticity, love, and independence. Each day was carefully structured around her child's needs, her own recovery, and the quiet cultivation of strength that came from surviving betrayal. She no longer measured her worth by someone else's attention, nor allowed past hurts to dictate her future. The home she created now radiated warmth, laughter, and security, a stark contrast to the cold, neglectful environment she had endured. Richard, despite maintaining his wealth and status, lived a hollow existence. Deals continued, investments remained profitable, and the world still recognized his name, yet the substance that had once defined his life was gone. Social circles whispered of his absence at critical moments, of the public scandal that had tainted his reputation, and of a moral failure that no fortune could erase. Every attempt to reclaim authority or influence was met with scrutiny, skepticism, and the lingering shadow of the choices that had isolated him. Power remained in his hands, but love, respect, and trust, the true measures of a life well lived, had vanished, leaving a man surrounded by material abundance yet utterly empty. Eliza faded completely from the narrative. The fleeting fame, admiration, and allure that had once accompanied her name dissipated under the relentless glare of public judgment. Her disappearance from social media, absence from social circles, and retreat from public life underscored a simple truth: indulgence built on betrayal cannot endure. Her role in Richard's abandonment became a cautionary footnote, a reminder that complicity in selfishness carries consequences that wealth cannot shield. Isabella, however, had emerged triumphant. Holding her child close, she felt a profound sense of liberation. She no longer sought validation from the man who had chosen desire over responsibility. Her life was hers to define, her future hers to shape. Every step forward, every moment of joy and security, was a testament to the strength forged through adversity. The moral victory she achieved was quiet but absolute. The story's final message was clear: the moment Richard chose indulgence over commitment, betrayal over care, he forfeited everything that truly mattered. Isabella's life, rebuilt with courage and integrity, stood as living proof that resilience, love, and moral strength outlast wealth, charm, and fleeting illusions of power. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Broken Truth.